But with that, I'd like to submit this testimony to urge the passage of the Compassionate Use Act of 2009-1493 by this committee and the General Assembly. In January of this year, 2009, my mother, Sally Naylor, died after a long battle with cancer. This was the single biggest event in my life, and it's been a tough year, to say the least. The cancer began to attack her breast over 10 years ago, where it was removed, but it slowly and painfully grew back and moved to her other breast, where it was removed once again with her breast. She underwent many treatments of radiation and chemotherapy, all of which have horrifying side effects. Anybody who has a family member who's gone through cancer knows, which are vomiting, nausea, dizziness, sleepiness. In her last 3 years of life, cancer redeveloped and moved into her bones. Some say it's the most painful form of cancer. And it eventually moved to her spinal fluid, where the cancer cells were able to grow floating tumors in her brain. By 2008, my mother was in bed almost all day. She would try hard to get out of bed and spend time with the family. We could all see how difficult this had become. Most of the time we spent with her in this last year was by her bedside. At this point, while the cancer was developing in her bones, she was prescribed treatments of Iridia, which is a drug that helps slow down the cancer's breaking down of the bone. She was going through excruciating pain. She talked to her doctor about a medication that could relieve this pain. And my mother and her physician never spoke about marijuana as a treatment. Instead, the doctor wrote my mother a prescription for a powerful, highly addictive painkiller patch called fentanyl. My mother had always steered clear of opiate-based medication. She thought she had an allergy, and she said that it made her feel worse than the symptoms she was trying to alleviate. She would feel nauseous and throw up if given too much opiate-based pharmaceutical treatment. My mother and I had a very close relationship. When I was a teenager, she encouraged me not to smoke pot. But I could talk to her about anything, and I never hid from her the fact that I found relief from anxiety, depression, and loneliness in high school by smoking marijuana. While she did not condone my use, she understood my feelings and was open with me about her occasional use of marijuana when she was my age. She urged me to stop, though, and wait until I was older to make decisions like this about my health and wellness. My mother also urged me not to take my Ritalin when the private school that I was attending told me, quote, that I needed it. And as the private school administrators watched over me at the water fountain, I never did swallow my Ritalin pills, as my mom told me. I was confident in my mother's decision-making years later when reports came out about the aftermath of widespread use of Ritalin and the high addiction to stimulant drugs for Ritalin use in their future. Ritalin users in their future. This was a drug that was approved by the FDA. She was a smart, thoughtful mother, and I miss her every day. She taught me many things. About a year before my mother passed away, we went to the beach with my brother to watch a full moon rise out of the sea in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she lived at the time. While we were waiting for my brother on the beach, my mother admitted to me that one of her friends, also a cancer patient, had given her a joint to relieve some of her pain and nausea from the chemo treatments that they were both receiving. I hardly looked at my mother and her cancer patient friend as if they were criminals, although in this country their possession of the plant rolled in a paper was a federal crime. My mother felt silly and wrong for bringing it up to me. I told her not to feel that way and that the power of the medicine would someday be used to help cure and relieve people who were going through the same thing that she was. And with that, we lit up the marijuana cigarette and we had a toke on the beach, our first time smoking together. She was 52 and I was 24. It was a beautiful spiritual connection that we had that night, and I will never forget it. We laughed and shared memories and held each other on the sand and enjoyed the moment. We were not criminals. We were a mother and her son, and we were finding relief from the horror of disease and cancer. We both knew that time was running out. But on that night, we laughed and watched the moon rise in awe of the power of nature. The beach, the ocean, the moon, and that plant. Why does our government define us as criminals? You are the Committee on Health and Human Services, and I ask you, are we humans, or are we criminals? You have the power to make that decision. In the last months of her life, I watched my mom become highly addicted to her pharmaceutically created need to relieve pain. Her bones were breaking down, and she was prescribed high-powered fentanyl patches, and she was sucking down fentanyl lollipops as well. With the lollipops, you could take little bits of medication at a time which she preferred, whereas the patches would stick to her skin for 3 days straight and give her a constant supply of fentanyl, the opiate-based drug she had pleaded with her doctor not to be given. Now she was addicted. She was taking so much fentanyl that there was no way to regulate it. The doctors threw their hands up in the air and told her to take whatever she wants, whenever she wants, and to eat whatever she wants. It seemed as though everyone had given up and my mother was going to die soon. The true horror in watching this happen to my mother came when she would run out of her prescription lollipops. She was prescribed 30 for a month, 1 per day, except the months that had 31 days, of course. Sometimes she would run out of her lollipops early, say on the 25th or the 26th day of the month. We would make calls to the pharmacy and they would say, "Well, we have your mother's medication, but we cannot release it for another 5 or 6 days because the insurance company doesn't want to pay for it yet." So my mother would lie in bed in brutal pain with cancer, bones falling apart, waiting for the insurance company to lift the gate so she could get her painkiller, which was sitting on a shelf down the road with her name on it. I would wake up in the room next to my mother's at 4 in the morning and she would be screaming in agony for her medicine, screaming that her body hurts and that her bones were falling apart. I wonder what this stress and pain did for the acceleration of the cancer cells as it strives on stress. My grandfather would have enough and he would go to the pharmacy and pay for the medicine out of his pocket. For 30 little lollipops of fentanyl, it cost my grandfather $1,000. You see, he didn't get the insurance discount rate of $500 per 30 because he wasn't buying in bulk. My grandmother, a conservative 79-year-old British girl, even asked my mother, "Do you think marijuana will help your pain?" My grandmother never took a drug in her life, and for her to be asking questions like these mean that ordinary people know exactly what Big Pharma has been trying to hide from us about marijuana. It's not a pharmaceutical solution, it's a biological one. The marijuana plant has medicinal uses and can help alleviate pain in patients without the addictive and debilitating side effects of opiate-based painkillers. That seems to be the problem for Big Pharma and their friends in the federal government. Why were there not other medicines available to my mother? She pleaded not to be put on opiates, but it seemed as though that's all the pharmaceutical industry had to offer. Because of this negligence by Big Pharma, the federal government, and the insurance companies, my mother had to die in this painful manner. Can we not all come to our senses and say, if a person is dying in excruciating pain and they want marijuana, let them have their marijuana? The marijuana plant should be legal for medicinal use, and in fact, the plant should be used industrially as well. It has many benefits. My mother spent the last week of her life in a hospice bed. She could not speak, and I never got to hear her say goodbye. She was given a constant dose of Dilaudid, which again, she asked not to be given previously in hospital stays. Dilaudid is another pain-killing pharmaceutical concoction which can slow down respiratory systems. This drug kept her drowsy and asleep in her final days on Earth. She stopped breathing on January 25th, 2009. My questions for this committee are as follows. What role did marijuana play in my mother's disease and/or treatment? Could it have played a more important role? Could my mother's wishes have been accommodated a little bit more by the medical pharmaceutical insurance industry if medical marijuana were an option? What role did government play in the quality of life my mother was offered in her final days on Earth? What role does government play in all of these decisions affecting people's health on the issue of medical marijuana? And should my government have the authority to outlaw a plant of nature with proven medicinal benefits? I think these are all good questions. I'm eager to hear your response to these questions. I just want to finish by reminding the members of the committee that, in fact, the Declaration of Independence and also the Constitution were drafted on hemp paper made from the cannabis plant.
Thank you so much for your time and your testimony.